It's a hot summer day here in Seoul. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Lee Ji-yoon. We have a lot on our plate, so let's get started with today's highlights. Is Korea entering a period of deflation? Consumer prices rose 0.7% on year in July, staying below the 1% range since late last year. We sit down with an expert to talk about concerns rising from Korea's record high current account surplus as the country sees its imports sliding even faster than its exports. The Korean government might need to bring out some new tools to jumpstart the economy, with recent numbers showing that consumer prices grew less than 1% for 8 months in a row. Our Shin Se-min has the story.
Korea's consumer prices grew in the 0% range again in July, unchanged from the previous month. Data from Statistics Korea shows that consumer prices grew 0.7% last month, and the figure has been below the 1% range since late last year. Factor in a recent cigarette price hike that took effect at the beginning of this year, and consumer prices have been actually dropping by a larger margin. The agency attributed the low growth to low global oil prices and a reduction in consumer utility prices, both of which further contributed to the weak price growth. The data is adding to concerns that Asia's fourth largest economy may have already entered a deflationary period. On top of that, the central bank said last month that the economy grew a mere 0.3% in the second quarter of this year, pulling the growth figure for the entire year down into the 2% range.
The phase of low growth and low prices will likely continue for some time, given the country's fundamentals. The potential for growth is also dropping due to the rapid aging of the population.
What's more worrisome is that the figures directly reflect the current state of the economy. Consumer prices and economic growth have been low for over 6 months now, raising questions about the government's stimulus measures.
The slow growth phase had been predicted even before the MERS outbreak and the nationwide drought this summer, so it's likely that the government's supplementary budget plan will ease such concerns.
He added a long-term shift in the current structure is needed, as the economic situations both at home and abroad are shifting, making it much more difficult for previous methods to work. Shin Se-min, Business Daily.
More and more young people here in Korea are giving up on trying to find a job. Now, this discouraging news comes with the latest OECD report, which found that of Koreans aged between 15 and 29, nearly 16% fell into the category of the so-called NEET group. Now, NEET is an acronym for not in employment, education, or training. Now, Korea's 16% figure is almost double the OECD average of about 8%. And the third highest among member nations. Turkey topped the list, followed by Mexico. The OECD attributed Korea's relatively high figures to an increase in unstable, low-quality jobs due to the trudging economy, which has put off young people from wanting to work altogether. The number of Koreans in their 20s and 30s taking out mortgage loans has surged over the past 2 years. According to data compiled by 5 Korean commercial banks, outstanding mortgages in June for people in their 20s was at roughly $5.2 billion, up nearly 50% from 2013. The corresponding figure for those in their 30s rose by 30%. Data show that people in this age bracket are actively buying homes in the face of surging rental prices and record low interest rates. The number of home transactions in this age group increased roughly 40% on year in the second quarter. Now, more people may be buying homes, but finding a chonse or lump sum key deposit rental is like picking stars out of the sky these days. And they say that chonse prices will only continue to climb, though monthly rent prices are projected to gradually fall. Our Eunice Kim tells us more.
A vast apartment complex in Seoul, housing more than 5,000 units. But you can count on one hand the number of homes up for chonse rental. Even though the lump sum key deposit has swollen by $40,000 to $50,000 from the start of the year, they're being snatched up at breakneck speed when they are available.
If the house is okay and there isn't a huge mortgage on it, renters want to ink their lease on the spot. There probably won't be any 전세 units available in mid-September and October.
The unique lump sum housing rental system has been popular for decades in Korea, but more and more supply continues to shrink, kicking up prices to historic highs. The average 전세 to sales price ratio surged to an average of 72% in June this year, compared to what typically had been about half of the property's value. On the other hand, the cost of monthly rent is gradually falling as more homeowners switch from a 전세 system in which the deposit is returned in full at the contract's expiry to the more universal monthly rent system.
We see this as a result of imbalance in supply and demand. Landlords are opting for monthly rents, while tenants continue to desire 전세 arrangements, and we expect this trend to continue.
There's also concern the 전세 deposits amounting to over $385 billion could become a debt problem if homeowners rely on banks to return the lump sum when their tenants move out. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
A local nonprofit organization is boycotting all products and services from Lotte Group and its affiliates. Why? It says Lotte Group's ongoing family feud over succession is a clear example of social indifference that the business has toward the local community. The Financial Consumer Agency says that the fight for leadership is based on greed, typical at Korea's large family-run conglomerates. It adds that questionable inter-affiliate deals and internal transactions have fueled economic inequality in the country. The agency is calling on consumers to join the boycott in a show of protest against such practices. And now let's get a check on how the markets fared here in Seoul today. Seoul shares ended higher on Tuesday as foreign and institutional investors snatched up blue chip shares following the market's declines in the previous trading sessions. At the closing bell, the benchmark Kospi was up nearly 1%, finishing the day at 2027.99. While the tech-heavy Kosdaq also went up by 2.2% to end at 730.03. On the foreign exchange counter, the Korean currency gained ground against the greenback, ending at 1,165.5 won. Korea's record-high current account surplus in the first half of the year is stoking concerns that this surplus streak might hurt Korean exporters' competitiveness. Let's find out what this is all about.
$12.2 billion. That's how much Korea logged in terms of its current account surplus in June, staying in the black for the longest time of 40 months since March 2012. This tops the 38-month-long surplus run from back in June 1986. But experts say that this record-high current account surplus is hurting local exporters by pushing the won up against key trading currencies. What's more is that imports have been tumbling, along with the country's already tepid exports due to low oil prices and feeble domestic demand. Analysts say this trend is typical of the so-called slow growth surplus, driven mostly by reduced imports that point to weaker domestic growth. The International Monetary Fund recently warned countries with large current account surpluses, such as China, Germany, and Korea, saying they need to, quote, boost domestic demand to help correct imbalances that are limiting global growth. So what should be done to bring Korea out of this current surplus trend?
And to tell us more about this, we're now joined by Professor Yang Jun-seok from the Catholic University of Korea. Welcome to the program.
Happy to be here.
All right, so can you first tell us how a country's current account measures the state of the economy, and what kind of signs can you read from it?
Okay, well, we are all familiar with the trade deficit or surplus. In Korea, that's exports of goods minus imports of goods. But if you think about it, there are other ways that Korea can earn foreign exchange. For example, rather than goods, we can export services, or Koreans can work for foreign companies and get wages, and Koreans can get perhaps payments from abroad that doesn't necessarily give something back, like maybe present from your grandfather who's living in the United States. So you add those current transfers, factor payments together, and basically the amount of surplus that we have is the amount Korea earns in terms of dollars or hard currency minus what Korea spent.
All right, but then when we say a surplus, a current account surplus, many people would think that's a good thing for the economy, but then why are there rising concerns about this current account surplus streak?
Okay, well, this concern about the surplus itself comes from two sources. One is sort of the old-fashioned mercantilist feeling. The more gold you have, the better the country is, which is not necessarily true. The other problem is if you ever get into a foreign financial crisis, a foreign exchange rate crisis, then having a lot of hard currency is useful for repaying whatever you owe foreign countries. But you have to remember, having too much surplus all the time is not very good either. You can get a surplus by, well, it's like saving at home. You can get a lot of savings by either working and earning a lot of money and spending a lot, but having a lot of money left over, which is the desirable way. The other way is you're not earning that much, so you starve yourself and earn a surplus. And that's what we seem to be having right now.
All right, then before Korea's this 40-month surplus streak, we saw something like this back in 1986 with the 38-month record. How does the economic situation now compare to then?
Well, if you look at the changes in exports and imports, back in 86, 87, you had growing exports and growing imports, which meant that the global economy was doing well, so a lot of Korean goods were getting sold, and Korean economy was doing well, so people had a lot of income and they spent the money on imports. So that was the good surplus. But right now, our exports are shrinking, our imports are shrinking even more, so basically we're earning surplus through starving ourselves.
All right, then why are we seeing this so-called slow growth as surplus?
Okay, well, on the export side, we have a global economic slowdown. So the exports markets are not there. For the import side, two factors. One is good, which is low oil prices. So we don't have to pay a lot to import our oil. So that's good. But also, our economy is not doing well. People's incomes are down, so they're not spending much. So falling imports like this is taken as an indicator that Korean economy itself is not doing very well right now, and we're in a very bad slowdown.
All right, then what other problems can stem from this kind of a surplus?
Okay, well, one problem which is coming up is that most of the advanced countries do seem to have been experiencing this type of deficit. And they recognize that this problem comes from the lack of global demand. But the obvious thing to do is to have an expansionary policy so the global consumers will start buying more, but no country wants to do it because they don't want to increase possible inflation in their own countries, or they don't want to add to the government deficit and debt in their countries. So every country is looking to use exports as an engine of growth, but there's no one out there buying. And no one wants to start its domestic demand, so everybody's looking for other countries to hopefully expand their economies and help their exports. So everybody's passing the buck.
All right, then like what we said, what other countries are going through something like this right now?
Well, the United States is going through a very rough deficit. There are some countries which do have a surplus. China and Germany are the biggest examples of that. But even those countries it's not a healthy surplus. It's this kind of starving yourself surplus that we see in Korea. So this is all a part of the global economic slowdown.
All right. Well, coming off from that, what other countries, like what I said, Germany and you said China,
yes.
right? Then what kind of conditions are these countries in right now?
Okay. Well, their economies are not doing very well, obviously. So they're looking for some kind of solution. And the solution that countries like the United States have come up with is that perhaps some of the other countries are keeping their exchange rates too low. And IMF has been sort of picking up on this. They claim that China and Korea keep their exchange rates undervalued so that their exports do well. Okay. The IMF report that came out last month said that Korean won was perhaps about 5 to 13% undervalued, which is a reason why our surplus may be too big. And they also accuse China of doing the same, and the United States Congress is threatening that as part of their condition to pass the TPP, the United States install some laws saying that if you manipulate currency like this, the United States government should take some sort of retaliatory measures.
All right, then going back to Korea, what kind of measures should the Korean government take from here on out then?
Well, sadly, Korean government can't do much about the global economy. So there's not much we can do there. But on the import side, we can try to use expansionary policies to try to pick up domestic demand. And we've been lowering the interest rate for the last year. That hasn't helped as much as we hoped. So everything is now riding on the fiscal policy, government spending, which is dependent on the supplementary budget that they're trying to pass right now, and they're trying to implement at the second half of the year. Hopefully, this will bring up the domestic consumption and also bring up the imports of foreign goods, but we'll have to wait and see.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in today, Professor.
Thank you.
And that wraps it up for today's edition of Business Daily. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back tomorrow with more business news that matters to you. Thanks for watching, and bye-bye for now.